Hey guys, let's talk about chapter 10 a little bit, the future directions of org design. I feel like we're living this right now a little bit, so maybe we'll see some interesting things emerge from this time. Sorry I'm getting this up late. I forgot about it, but here we go. I don't think this chapter is that thick, so hopefully just reading the book and seeing the slides, you were doing okay with it, but here we go. All right, so first your chapter talks about some trends that are shaping the world at work, which are shaping organizational design. So first of all, social media is definitely a big part of it and becoming a more important part of our lives by the day right now. Companies both are social media companies. They also recruit through social media like LinkedIn. And also the ability to connect to people all the time changes expectations for the way that we communicate, how frequently we communicate, things like that, and the way that communication spreads. People talk to each other at all levels, vertically, horizontally, diagonally. So we have to be aware of that. Technology certainly is playing a role. Of course, social media is affected by technology, but also cloud technology, which means that it's a lot easier for people to work from anywhere, which we're also discovering today. More and more people are getting to set up to work at home using, Google Docs, using Dropbox, using virtual VPNs, virtual private networks, all of that sort of stuff. The millennial workforce, which is quickly becoming the Gen Z, sometimes called the iGen workforce as well. There's a bit of a debate where the millennial generation stops and iGen begins, but which is why it also causes some confusion in talking about generations. A lot of researchers now talk about the millennial generation ending in 95 or 97. So we are starting to get iGen workers into the workforce as well, which I always want to be cautious when I'm talking about generations, because some supposedly generational differences are really just differences that have to do with younger workers versus older workers, less experienced workers versus more experienced workers. But there do seem to be some generational shifts in terms of values, in terms of behaviors, which we see with the different technologies that millennials grew up with versus baby boomers or Gen Xers, and that certainly iGen people grew up with versus millennials and all these other generations, which have affected the way that they communicate, the way that they act. Of course, economic things like recessions versus booming times also affects the values and the expectations that people in different generations have for work and the way that work will be, how stable it will be, whether they even want it to be stable, things like that. So, as millennials take over more of the work, people are seeing kind of a shift in what kinds of work people want to do, what kinds of flex policies are expected, what kind of rewards are expected, and we may also see a shift as we see more iGens enter the workplace. I always want to be real cautious about, generational stuff, because, like I said, depending upon how you do generational studies, you could just be picking up, these kids today gripes that are pretty universal from more older and experienced people versus younger and inexperienced people who are going to act differently and make mistakes as they learn the ropes. But there have been some large cohort studies that have looked at generations of people at the same age and their values and the way that they behaved, and there do seem to be some differences. So that's one thing. Mobility, we've all got smartphones in our pockets, or most people do. So you can complete your work basically anywhere. You can get a Wi-Fi hotspot in a lot of different places if you really needed one for your laptop or something like that. So, a lot of workers don't have a fixed office necessarily. They're just working from wherever they are. And then, of course, globalization. People are working together all over the world, regardless of where they are. We have some characteristics of future organizations, some things that we might expect to see. Globally distributed with smaller teams, a more connected workforce, entrepreneurial. So entrepreneurship is about finding gaps in the market, about finding places to create value within the current company that you work for, versus entrepreneurs who see that gap, see a place to create something new and take it out on their own. Okay. There's a lot of safety in being entrepreneurial because you don't have to take as much risk, but you also don't reap as much rewards. But we encourage our employees to be creative, to be looking for those gaps in the market, to find new ways to serve our customers, or new ways to do business. Operates like a small company, focuses on creating a place of want, not a place of need, adapts to change faster. So that's what we were talking about with agility last chapter, and innovation anywhere. Runs in the cloud. We see that more and more. More women in management roles. We see that happening somewhat more. Operates with a flatter structure. Yeah, less hierarchy. Tells stories. So that's about kind of building culture. Democratizes learning. Everybody's getting training. There are resources available for all employees to learn and to create and to change the way that work is being done. Shifts from profit to prosperity, and we're going to talk a little bit about triple bottom line and other approaches that some companies are taking, where they are no longer just focusing on maximizing shareholder value or maximizing profit, but rather on multiple impacts or multiple stakeholders that are going to be affected. Okay, and then adapts to the future employee and future manager. All right, so let's talk about some work trends that are also creating design challenges. Okay, so strategy is going to be changing more quickly. We've talked about transient advantage and how a sustained competitive advantage may not be possible today. All of that sort of stuff. The organization as an ecosystem. Organizational boundaries are blurring, so more outsourcing, more partnerships, elaborate ecosystems rather than self-contained entities. So, we can access information about our supplier. Our suppliers can see when we're getting low on stuff because we have these interconnected supply chain and information technology that manages the systems. We outsource certain work to other companies and kind of operate in this network model. So the lines of who's inside and outside of the organization have blurred in a way that they weren't in the past. Rapid collaboration is required. So, we have new technology that allows people to collaborate, self-organize, get the information that they need from other people without having to go through real formal channels and layers of hierarchy. And that may have impacts for design in terms of, lateral processes and lateral capabilities and things like that, like who's talking to whom. These technologies allow people to talk to each other and communicate more frequently. Do we need to monitor that or structure that in any way, or do we just let it happen? That's something that companies are going to have to consider. New types of teams where we have more kind of ad hoc teams or more task forces that come together for a little while and then disband and get together with other people. So we got to quickly ramp up to trusting each other, to knowing what our roles and responsibilities are, and to performing quickly so that we can move on to the next thing. which means building psychological safety quickly can be really important. The gig economy. So for those of you who are not familiar with that term, gig economy means people who work a bunch of different gigs as to create a career or a job for themselves. So these are Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, TaskRabbit people, handy workers, Care.com, people who are working these kind of odd jobs on these platform businesses where they work basically as independent contractors and may work multiple jobs at a time. So I might drive for Uber and for Lyft and pick up groceries for Instacart and drive food around for Uber Eats and create myself a salary from all of these little pieces of work. This is also kind of creates an unstable talent base because if I can do all of these little gigs, I can create a different world for myself than if I need to be working a normal 9-to-5 job. Also, Uber, Lyft, maybe I drive for both, or maybe I decide to drive for one versus the other, or I swap back and forth. How do the companies that rely on these gig workers make sure that they have enough gig workers and that they're not losing them to these other platforms? Virtual is the rule, so we need to be collaborative and coordinated globally by technology, but also realize that virtual teams do have limits and difficulties that they face. And so we need to build in kind of those lateral capabilities and coordinating mechanisms to make sure people are working together effectively. Analytics are playing a role in design. So, those of you who are on more of the data analysis side might be happy to see that you're going to be valuable here. What kind of analysis is going to be valuable for designers? Your book talks a little bit about social network analysis to look at patterns of behavior to see who's really talking to whom, what is really happening. We can also do talent analytics to look at, which skills are going to work well together. Big data, we're going to talk about a little bit. So that's coming into play. Leadership behaviors are changing. We need to focus on the design, looking at constant alignment with strategy and the rest of the parts of the star. Leaders may need to, really coach employees, empower decision making. It's a different way of working than it used to be. The organizational culture challenges also come into play. How adaptable, how resilient are these organizations? Can we develop a continuous learning mindset? It looks like that one for some reason is missing from this slide. But yeah, organizational culture challenges. Oh, it's up higher for some reason. Sorry, I didn't see it at first. It's above the gig economy. And then global cultural differences are also important to be aware of. So organizational culture, but then global culture where we're working with different norms, different values, different orientations, as well as, of course, different time zones and things like that. How do we make that work? All right, and so design challenges are shaping the design process. Instead of a focus on fit and congruence, we have to look at the very complex environment of organizations. We have potentially multiple environments that are affecting the organizations, and they are evolving all the time. So we don't want to create designs that are too rigid or tightly aligned because the environment is changing, so the design needs to change. And so we might be focusing more on agility rather than fit. And instead of focusing on hierarchy and structure, we have to get out of design thinking to think about empathy, testing new ideas via rapid prototyping, piloting design efforts, so being more entrepreneurial, more creative, more of a learning organization, and less rigid structure. Again, moving away from rigid anything, really. And then instead of focusing on design to control behavior and to make things stable, we might focus on emerging design. So we're moving, organizations away from a real stable status quo so that people can